The night the world looked away. The city had the kind of evening that made loneliness louder. Streetlights shimmered against damp pavement, storefront windows glowed with warmth that never quite reached the people passing by, and the air carried the mixed scent of coffee, rain, and exhaust. Crowds flowed along the sidewalks in steady currents, coats pulled tight, eyes fixed forward, everyone moving with quiet urgency toward their own destinations. In the middle of that motion, almost invisible, stood a young mother with a baby pressed tightly against her chest. She hovered near the entrance of a small café, half in shadow, half in light, her figure thin, her jacket worn, her arms shaking not only from the weight of her child, but from exhaustion that had seeped into her bones. The baby whimpered softly, the fragile cry of hunger and discomfort, a sound that brushed past hurried ears without slowing them. People noticed and then didn't. A glance, a tightening of lips, a turn of the head. The city was full of suffering, and most had learned how not to see it. The mother rocked gently from foot to foot, whispering to the baby, words meant only for him. Her hair fell loosely around a face marked by sleepless nights and quiet fear. Her eyes darted toward the cafe door, then away again, as if she were unsure whether she was allowed to step inside a place that smelled of warmth and safety. She adjusted her grip, pulling the baby closer, shielding him from the cold, from the world, from everything she could. Her lips were pale, her breath uneven. This was not just a tired woman. This was someone standing at the edge of what she could carry. Inside the cafe, the low hum of conversation and the soft clink of cups created an illusion of comfort. Near the counter, dressed simply in dark clothes, stood a man waiting in line. His posture was relaxed, his presence quiet. There was nothing about him that demanded attention. His hair was tied back loosely, his face calm, almost thoughtful. To most of the people around him, he was just another customer ordering a late coffee, but his eyes were not on the menu board. They were drawn, again and again, to the glass window, to the fragile scene unfolding just outside. Keanu Reeves noticed everything. He noticed the way the mother tried to bounce gently, though her legs were clearly tired. He noticed the careful way she adjusted the thin blanket around the baby. He noticed how her eyes flickered when people passed too close, as if bracing for words that might hurt. He noticed the moment when a man brushed past her and muttered something under his breath, and how her shoulders flinched as though she had been struck. The baby's cry grew a little louder, and a few customers inside shifted uncomfortably, irritation briefly touching their faces. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, recognition, the kind that comes from knowing what it is to feel unseen. Without hesitation, he stepped out of the line. The door opened softly and cool night air slipped inside. Keanu walked toward her slowly, not wanting to startle her, not wanting to look like another problem approaching. When he spoke, his voice was low and gentle. "Hi," he said. "Are you all right?" The mother looked up quickly, surprise flashing across her face. Instinctively, she nodded, the automatic answer of someone who had learned to hide the truth. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Keanu crouched slightly so he wasn't standing over her, so his eyes were level with hers. "Your baby sounds like he's had a long day," he said softly. There was no judgment in his tone, only care. "It's warmer inside. Would you like to sit down for a bit?" Her breath caught. People didn't usually offer her warmth. They offered distance. She hesitated, eyes glistening, searching his face for whatever hidden motive she had learned to expect. But she found none, only patience, only quiet respect. He held the door open. Inside, the cafe felt like another world. Warm air wrapped around them. The smell of fresh bread and coffee lingered gently. Keanu guided her to a small table near the window, a quiet corner where the noise softened. He didn't rush her. He didn't make a scene. He simply pulled out a chair, waited until she sat, and made sure the baby was settled. The baby's crying eased almost immediately, his tiny body relaxing against his mother's chest. Keanu returned to the counter and ordered more than coffee. He ordered soup, bread, tea. He asked for warm milk for the baby. When the tray was ready, he carried it himself, setting it down carefully in front of her. The woman stared at the food as if it might vanish. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then her eyes filled and her voice broke. I don't know how to thank you." Keanu gave a small, almost shy smile. "You don't have to," he said. "Just eat and take a breath." She lifted the spoon with trembling fingers. The first taste of warm soup made her close her eyes just for a second. The baby shifted, soothed by the warmth, and soon his breathing slowed into sleep. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she ate, not from sadness alone, but from the strange ache of relief. Keanu sat across from her, not speaking, not staring, simply being there. Minutes passed, then more. A few people began to glance over, curiosity stirring. A couple whispered to each other. Someone frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of a struggling mother in their calm space. The woman noticed. She always noticed. Her shoulders curled inward and her gaze fell to the table. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You don't need to look down," he said gently. "You're doing your best, that matters." She swallowed. "I don't even know your name." "Keanu," he replied, offering only his first name as if it were just another ordinary thing. "I'm Mia," she said after a moment, "and this is Ethan." Keanu looked at the sleeping baby, then back at her. "He's lucky," he said quietly. "He has a strong mother." The word hit her like a hand to the chest. Strong. No one had called her that in a long time. She blinked hard, trying not to cry again. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed weakly on the table. She glanced at it, and whatever color the warmth had brought to her face drained away. A short message glowed on the cracked screen. "Rent overdue. Final notice." Keanu saw the shift. He didn't ask immediately. He waited, letting her decide. Her voice came out small. "I just want him to be safe," she said. "I don't care about myself. I just want him to have a chance." Keanu met her eyes, something deep and steady behind his own. "You're not alone in this moment," he said. Mia wanted to believe him. She truly did. And she didn't yet know that this night, which had begun like all the others, with cold streets and quiet desperation, was only the beginning of something that would reach far beyond this small café, far beyond this fragile table, and into a future neither of them could yet imagine. The woman who recognized the silence. The café's warmth did not erase the cold outside, but it softened the edges of it, the way a small candle can make a dark room feel less cruel. Mia sat with Ethan sleeping against her chest, his tiny breath steady now, his cheeks finally relaxed, as if his body had been waiting for permission to rest. The soup in front of her steamed gently, and with every slow bite she took, a little more color returned to her face, though the fear behind her eyes never fully disappeared. It wasn't the kind of fear that belonged to a single moment. It was the kind that had lived inside her for weeks, months. Fear of the next bill, the next threat, the next door that would close. Across from her, Keanu stayed quiet, not filling the space with questions, not forcing her to perform gratitude, not pressing her to explain why she looked like she hadn't slept properly in a long time. He simply remained present, and to Mia that presence felt almost unfamiliar, like hearing a gentle voice in a world that had only shouted. She kept glancing at her phone, not because she wanted to read the message again, but because she couldn't stop imagining what would happen when she walked back out into the city. She pictured the landlord's face, the way his voice changed when he decided someone was small enough to crush. She pictured her own front door, the peeling paint, the weak lock that never truly made her feel safe. She pictured waking up to pounding, to yelling, to strangers standing in a hallway demanding money she didn't have. The thought made her stomach tighten so hard she had to pause with the spoon halfway to her mouth. Keanu noticed, quietly, the same way he had noticed everything else, and though he didn't demand an answer, his steady gaze reminded her she didn't have to pretend in front of him. "I'm sorry," she whispered suddenly like the words were a reflex. "I didn't mean to ruin your night." Keanu's expression softened, but his voice held a firm gentleness, like a hand placed on a shaking shoulder. "You didn't ruin anything," he said. "You're not a burden for existing, not you, not him." Mia swallowed hard, the shame she'd carried for so long rising like a tide. People had made her feel like she took up too much space just by sitting down, like she was too loud even when she was silent, like she was an uncomfortable reminder that life could fall apart. She lowered her gaze, and for a moment it looked as if she might retreat back into herself, but then Ethan shifted slightly in her arms, and the tiny movement pulled her back into the room. She kissed his forehead, trembling. "He deserves better than this," she said, voice tight. "I keep telling myself I'll figure it out. I keep telling myself tomorrow will be different, but tomorrow keeps coming and nothing changes." Keanu didn't rush to reply. He let the sentence sit there, honored it the way you honor a confession. Then he spoke quietly, almost like he was speaking to the part of her that was still fighting. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're tired," he said. "That doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're human." Mia's throat burned. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself steady, but the truth inside her was too heavy to keep sealed. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not for me, for him. I'm scared someone will take him away. I'm scared I'll make one mistake and the world will decide I'm not good enough. I'm scared that one day he'll look at me and wonder why I couldn't fix everything." Keanu's eyes darkened with something like memory. He didn't look away. "He won't remember whether the walls were perfect," he said. "He'll remember whether he was loved. He'll remember the way you held him like he mattered. That's what stays." The words hit Mia in a way that felt both comforting and painful, because love was the one thing she had been giving without limit, and yet the world kept telling her it wasn't enough. She stared at Keanu like she was trying to find the lie in his face, the hidden superiority, the moment where he would finally turn into everyone else. But he stayed the same, quiet, humble, steady, and that steadiness cracked something inside her. Her eyes filled again, and this time she didn't try as hard to fight it. The cafe door opened, letting in another gust of cold air and the wet scent of rain, and Mia's whole body reacted as if danger had stepped into the room. Her shoulders tightened. Her arms wrapped more protectively around Ethan. Keanu noticed the change, the flinch, the reflex of someone who had learned to expect harm. He followed her gaze toward the entrance, but the person who walked in didn't look threatening. She was a woman in a long coat, hair tucked neatly behind one ear, face half hidden by the glow of the streetlights behind her. She paused just inside, scanning the room in a way that wasn't nosy but careful, as if she were looking for something specific. When her eyes landed on Keanu, something shifted, recognition, subtle but unmistakable, followed by a quiet hesitation that suggested she didn't want to disturb him. Mia didn't know who the woman was. She only saw that the woman's eyes softened when she looked at Keanu, as if she understood him in a way strangers usually didn't. The woman took a few steps forward, then paused near their table, not entering their space without permission. "Keanu," she said softly, voice warm with familiarity. Keanu looked up, and for the first time that night his calm expression changed into something gentler, almost relieved, like seeing someone safe after a long day. "Sandra," he replied. Mia's heart skipped. Sandra. There was only one Sandra who fit that name and that kind of quiet confidence, and when Mia looked closer it clicked. The woman's face was one she had seen in posters, in movies, in interviews that played on screens she rarely had time to watch anymore. Sandra Bullock, a real star, standing here, in this small cafe, with her eyes focused not on the room, not on the attention she could attract, but on Keanu and the trembling mother beside him. Sandra's gaze moved gently to Mia, and the way she looked at her was different from the stares Mia was used to. It wasn't curiosity with judgment. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to respect. Sandra's eyes dropped briefly to Ethan, then returned to Mia with a softness that felt like being wrapped in a blanket. "Hi," Sandra said quietly, almost like she was speaking to someone she already cared about. "Is he okay?" Mia didn't know how to answer. She felt suddenly exposed, like her poverty had become louder just because someone famous had noticed her. But Sandra didn't seem to see the worn jacket or the tired hair as something to be ashamed of. She seemed to see only a mother holding her child like her life depended on it. Mia nodded. He's tired," she whispered. "He was hungry earlier." Sandra's expression tightened, not with judgment, but with the kind of anger that rises when you realize the world has been cruel to someone. She pulled out a chair slowly, not sitting until she saw Keanu's slight nod, and when she did sit, she angled her body toward Mia in a way that made it feel less like an interview and more like a conversation between women who understood exhaustion. "You're doing a good job," Sandra said simply. Mia blinked, startled. "You don't know me." Sandra gave a faint, sad smile. "I know what it looks like when someone's running on empty," she said, "and I know what it looks like when they keep going anyway." Keanu watched the exchange silently, and Mia realized something. This wasn't a random celebrity moment. There was a history between Keanu and Sandra, something deep and quiet. The way they spoke to each other wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, like two people who had survived their own storms and recognized the same fight in someone else. Sandra looked at Keanu for a second, the kind of look that asked a question without words. "Are you okay?" And Keanu answered without speaking, his gaze calm as if to say, "I'm doing what I can." Mia's hands began trembling again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of being seen by two people who had the power to ignore her and still chose not to. She shifted Ethan slightly, trying to keep him asleep. "I don't want trouble," she said suddenly, voice tight, because fear still lived in her bones. "I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to get something from you." Sandra's eyes held steady. "Listen to me," she said, voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to defend your need. Every human being needs help sometimes. That doesn't make you bad, it makes you real." Those words landed like a lifeline. Mia's eyes filled again, and this time she didn't wipe the tears away quickly. She let them fall because she was too tired to pretend she wasn't breaking. "I didn't plan any of this," she whispered. I didn't plan to end up like this. I had dreams, I had plans, but life just kept closing in. Sandra nodded slowly, as if she'd heard the same sentence from too many people who believed they were alone in it. Life can do that, she said softly, and it can make you believe you deserve it, but you don't. Mia's phone buzzed again, and the sound was so small, yet it made her flinch hard. Keanu noticed immediately. Sandra noticed too. Mia glanced down, and her face drained once more. Another message, another threat. Her sister's earlier warning echoed in her mind like a siren. Don't come home, it's not safe. Her breath caught. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. Sandra leaned forward slightly, keeping her voice low so no one else could hear. Mia, she said gently, what's happening? Who's making you afraid? Mia's lips trembled. She looked at Keanu, then at Sandra. And for the first time the truth rose to her throat with nowhere else to go. It's not just rent, she whispered. There are people who think I owe them. I left to protect my baby. I left to protect my sister. But now she's telling me it's not safe. They're still looking for me. The words hung in the air like cold fog. Sandra's expression changed instantly, her softness sharpening into focus. Keanu's posture stayed calm, but his eyes became more alert, like someone who understood that danger was not a dramatic thing. It was quiet, it was real, and it could arrive without warning. Sandra didn't panic. She didn't ask loud questions. She simply leaned in closer, her voice steady. Okay, she said. We're going to be smart. We're going to keep you safe. You hear me? Mia stared, stunned. Why? She whispered. Why would either of you care this much? Keanu answered first, his voice quiet, as if the truth had been waiting behind his ribs all along. Because we've both seen what happens when everyone walks past, he said, and we decided a long time ago we wouldn't be those people. Sandra's eyes stayed on Mia. And because your baby shouldn't have to grow up believing the world is only cruel, she added, not when we have a choice. At that exact moment, the cafe door opened again, and a tall figure stepped inside, scanning the room with impatient eyes. Mia froze so hard it was like her blood turned to ice. She recognized him immediately, her landlord. But this time he wasn't alone. Another man stood behind him, broader, silent, watching. The landlord's eyes locked onto Mia, and a cruel smile appeared like he had finally found what he wanted. He started walking toward their table, his steps heavy with threat, his voice already rising. There you are, he said, loud enough for others to hear. You thought you could hide. Mia's breath disappeared. Ethan shifted slightly in her arms. Sandra's posture straightened, calm but ready. Keanu stood slowly, placing himself between Mia and the approaching men, his body relaxed but unmovable. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply looked at the landlord with the quiet authority of someone who could not be intimidated by cruelty. Lower your voice, Keanu said evenly. There's a baby here. The landlord scoffed. I don't care, he snapped. She owes me money. She's 2 weeks late. I want her out tomorrow, and if she can't pay, then she can deal with the consequences. Sandra stood too now, and the room seemed to shift as she rose, not because she demanded attention, but because something in her presence made people look up. Consequences, she repeated, voice calm but sharp. You're threatening a mother holding her child in a cafe. Do you hear yourself? The landlord glanced at her, irritation on his face, then his eyes narrowed as recognition slowly dawned. His arrogance faltered for a second. His companion behind him stiffened. Suddenly the landlord wasn't quite as loud. This is none of your business, he muttered, trying to recover his control. Sandra didn't flinch. When you bring intimidation into a public space, it becomes everyone's business, she said. And when there's a child involved, it becomes my business. The cafe grew silent. People who had been pretending not to notice were now watching, phones lowered, faces tense. The landlord looked around and realized he was no longer the only one holding power. For a moment he hesitated, calculating, deciding whether to push or retreat. Keanu didn't move. Sandra didn't move. And Mia sat frozen behind them, heart pounding, holding Ethan like he was the last fragile thing keeping her alive. The landlord finally spat, fine, but his eyes were venomous. This isn't over. He turned and stormed out, his companion following close behind, the door slamming hard enough to make the cups on the counter rattle. Mia's body started shaking again, the delayed reaction hitting her like waves. Sandra turned immediately to her, softening her voice again, stepping closer without invading her space. Breathe, Sandra said gently. Look at me, you're okay. Mia tried to breathe, but the fear was too deep. He's going to come back, she whispered. He's going to come back and he's going to make it worse. He always does. Keanu crouched slightly, bringing his face closer so she didn't have to look up like a child being scolded. Then we don't let you face him alone, he said. Sandra nodded once, firm. We're not letting you walk back into that, she added. Not tonight. Mia stared at them like they were speaking a language her heart had forgotten. Help without payment. Protection without humiliation. Kindness without conditions. It felt impossible, and yet it was happening. Ethan made a small sound in his sleep, a soft sigh, and Mia held him tighter, tears streaming down her cheeks as the weight of everything pressed against her. Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a small paper and pen, then slid it gently across the table toward Keanu, as if they were already moving into action without drama. Keanu wrote something quickly, then looked at Mia. We're going to get you somewhere safe, he said. A place where you can sleep without fear. Mia's lips parted. I can't take that. Sandra's voice was steady. You're not taking, she said. You're accepting, there's a difference, and someday when you're on your feet, you'll do the same for someone else. Mia wanted to argue because survival had taught her that nothing was free, but her body was too tired to keep fighting kindness. Her eyes flickered between them, searching for the trap and finding none. She swallowed hard. What if those people find me? She whispered. What if I put you in danger? Keanu's gaze held hers, calm and unshaken. We'll be careful, he said, and we'll be smart, but we won't leave you. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping softly against the windows like a quiet countdown. Inside, something else had begun, something bigger than soup and warmth and a single act of help. A plan was forming, a path forward. And though Mia didn't know it yet, this night would become the turning point she would remember for the rest of her life, not because someone saved her like a hero in a movie, but because two people chose to stand beside her and remind her she was still worthy of dignity. As Sandra and Keanu moved quietly, already thinking about safe shelters, legal help, and the next steps, Mia felt something small and fragile flicker inside her chest. Something she had not felt in years, something dangerous in its beauty. Hope, and hope, she was about to learn, could be the most powerful thing in the world when it finally found you. The place where fear finally slept. The rain had thickened into a soft, steady curtain by the time they stepped out of the café, turning the city lights into long, trembling reflections across the pavement. The night felt colder now, heavier, as if it knew something fragile was being carried through it. Mia held Ethan closer beneath her coat, shielding him from the damp air, her body still tense from the landlord's threat, her ears tuned to every sound behind them. She half expected to hear hurried footsteps, a voice calling her name, the scrape of anger on concrete. But instead, she heard only the rain, the distant rush of traffic, and the steady rhythm of her own breath as she struggled to keep it even. Keanu walked on one side of her, Sandra on the other, not crowding her, not gripping her arms, simply forming a quiet barrier of presence. There was something grounding about the way they moved, unhurried yet purposeful, as though fear was not something they denied, but something they refused to let lead. Mia had never walked like this with anyone before, never between two people who were so clearly choosing to share the weight of her night. It felt unreal, like a scene from someone else's life, and she kept waiting for the moment when it would dissolve and leave her alone again. But it didn't. Each step was real. Each breath of cold air was real. Each soft stir from Ethan against her chest was real, and so were they. They didn't head toward a hotel or some place that glittered with money and distance. They walked several blocks to a quieter part of the city where the buildings were lower, the streets narrower, and the lights fewer but softer. When they stopped in front of a modest brick building with warm windows glowing behind rain-speckled glass, Mia felt a flicker of confusion. It didn't look like rescue. It looked like something more ordinary, something safer. Sandra reached the door first and pressed the buzzer, speaking quietly into the intercom. After a moment, the lock clicked, and the door opened to reveal a woman in her late 50s with gentle eyes and silver streaks in her hair. She wore a thick sweater and a look of calm that felt like the opposite of the chaos Mia carried inside. "Sandra," the woman said softly, recognition clear in her voice. "I was wondering when I'd see you again." Sandra smiled faintly. "Hi, Margaret," she replied. "We need a room tonight, a safe one." Margaret's gaze shifted to Mia and then to the sleeping baby. The moment her eyes took in the way Mia was holding Ethan, something in her expression changed. She didn't ask questions, she didn't sigh, she simply stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "You're welcome here." The words hit Mia harder than anything else that night. Welcome, not tolerated, not allowed. Welcome. Inside, the building smelled faintly of clean linen and something warm, like soup or tea. The hallway lights were low, and the floors creaked softly beneath their steps. There was no luxury here, but there was care. On the walls hung children's drawings, small framed quotes about strength and starting again, photographs of smiling women holding babies in sunlight. Mia's throat tightened as she took them in. She felt as if she had stepped into a place that knew her pain long before she arrived. Margaret led them down the hall and opened a door near the end. The room inside was simple but warm. A narrow bed with fresh sheets, a small crib near the window, a lamp casting a soft yellow glow, a folded blanket waiting on a chair. It was not much, but to Mia it felt like the safest place she had seen in months. "You can stay here as long as you need tonight," Margaret said gently. "There's a bathroom just down the hall, clean clothes if you need them, and the kitchen's always open." Mia stood frozen in the doorway, tears filling her eyes again. She had expected conditions, papers, lectures, judgment. Instead, she was being given space, shelter, quiet. Keanu spoke softly, "Thank you." Margaret nodded at him, then at Sandra, and then returned her gaze to Mia. "You're safe here," she said, as if the words were something she wanted Mia to carry into her bones. Then she stepped back, leaving them alone. Mia moved slowly into the room, as though afraid it might disappear. She sat on the edge of the bed and carefully adjusted Ethan, easing him into her arms more comfortably, her shoulders finally lowering a fraction. Sandra closed the door quietly behind them, shutting out the rain, the city, the threats that had followed Mia like shadows. For the first time that night, there was no one watching her with irritation, no one measuring her worth by what she could pay. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for weeks. Keanu stood near the door, giving her space. Sandra moved closer, her voice low. "This place helps women get back on their feet," she explained. "Not just a night. They help with housing connections, legal aid, job training. It's quiet. It's protected." Mia's eyes widened slightly. "You know this place?" Sandra nodded. "I've supported it for a long time, not with my name on anything, just because I've seen how fast life can break and how much difference a safe place can make." Mia looked around again, really seeing the room now. The folded towels, the small basket of toiletries on the dresser, the way the crib was positioned near the bed as if someone had thought about the fear of waking up and not seeing your child. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't owe us gratitude," he said. "You deserve rest." Those words were heavier than they sounded. Deserve, not lucky, not temporary, deserve. Mia slowly unbuttoned her coat, the worn fabric slipping from her shoulders, and laid it across the chair. She adjusted Ethan again, then carefully placed him into the crib. For a moment she hovered over him, afraid to let go, afraid that if she stepped back, something bad would happen. But Ethan only stirred slightly, then settled, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The sight of him sleeping in a real crib, clean and warm, made something inside her chest crack open. She pressed a hand to her mouth to muffle the sound that escaped her, a quiet sob that carried months of fear and exhaustion. Sandra stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the back of the chair near Mia, not touching her, but close enough to offer support without taking control. "It's okay," she said softly. "Let it out. This room can hold it." And Mia did. She cried in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry before, not the quick silent tears of public places, but the deep, shaking kind that came from the bottom of her lungs. She cried for the nights she had walked with Ethan for hours to keep him warm, for the jobs she lost because no one wanted a mother with no one to watch her baby, for the way people looked through her, for the way fear had wrapped itself around her life and refused to leave. She cried until her shoulders ached and her face burned and her breath stuttered. Keanu didn't interrupt. He didn't fill the air with encouragements or instructions. He simply stayed, his presence solid, his eyes kind, letting her grief exist without being hurried. When her sobs finally softened into an even breathing, she sank down onto the bed, one hand still gripping the edge of the crib. The room felt impossibly quiet, safe quiet, the kind that lets you hear your own heartbeat. "I didn't plan for my life to become this," she whispered hoarsely. "I used to have a small apartment. I used to work at a daycare. I loved being around children. I thought I was doing something good. Then Ethan's father left. Then the rent went up. Then my sister said she knew people who could help, and that's when everything went wrong. I thought I was protecting my baby. I thought I was being smart, but it all just collapsed." Sandra listened, her face calm but intent. "You were trying to survive," she said. "There's no shame in that." Mia shook her head slowly. "There is when survival puts him in danger," she replied, glancing at Ethan. "There is when people start looking for you, when you don't know who to trust, when you can't even sleep without listening for footsteps." Keanu's voice was quiet, but it carried. "You're sleeping tonight," he said. "Here." Mia looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time something else rose to the surface of her fear. Curiosity. "Why do you care this much?" she asked. "Both of you, you don't know me, you don't know what I've done. What if I'm not the person you think I am?" Sandra's answer came gently. "We're not here because we think you're perfect," she said. "We're here because we think you're human." Keanu nodded. "And because once," he added, "when everything in my life felt like it had broken beyond repair, I was given kindness I didn't earn. It didn't fix my pain, but it kept me alive inside it, and I never forgot that." Mia studied him, seeing past the calm to something heavy and real. "You lost someone," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Keanu didn't deny it. His eyes lowered slightly, then returned to hers. "I lost more than one," he replied, "and I learned that pain doesn't make you special, it makes you capable of understanding others." The room grew still again, filled not with fear now, but with something deeper, shared silence, the kind that forms when truths are spoken. Sandra glanced at the small clock on the wall. "It's late," she said softly. "You need rest. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk to Margaret. We'll help you figure out the next steps. Legal support. A longer-term place. We're not disappearing in the morning." The words sent a fragile warmth through Mia's chest. "You promise." Keanu met her eyes. "We'll be here." Mia stood slowly, walked the small distance to the door, then hesitated. Her voice trembled again, but there was something different in it now. Not only fear, also gratitude. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," she said. "But tonight you gave me something I haven't had in a long time." Sandra tilted her head slightly. "What's that?" Mia looked back at Ethan, then at them. "A night where fear doesn't get to decide everything." Keanu felt the words settle into his chest. He nodded once. "That's a good place to start." Sandra reached into her bag and placed a small piece of paper on the dresser. "My number," she said. "And his, if you wake up scared, if anything feels wrong, you don't hold it alone." Mia nodded, carefully memorizing the sight of it, like proof that this night wasn't a dream. When the door closed softly behind them, the room grew quiet in a way Mia had almost forgotten was possible. She stood there for a long moment listening. No shouting, no footsteps in anger, only the faint hum of the building and the soft breathing of her child. She moved back to the bed and sat, then slowly lay down on her side, facing the crib. She watched Ethan sleep, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the small twitch of his fingers. Tears slid again down her temples, but this time they were different. They didn't carry only fear. They carried relief. And beneath that relief, something small but stubborn began to take root. For the first time in months, Mia closed her eyes without rehearsing escape plans. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to sleep. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets, softening the city. And somewhere between the sound of distant traffic and the quiet walls of a safe place, fear loosened its grip just enough for something else to take its place. Hope. And in the stillness of that modest room, where no one was asking her to leave, where no one was demanding proof of her worth, Mia finally rested in a way that felt like the beginning of healing, unaware that the days ahead would test her in new ways, and that the strength she had been forced to build would soon be called upon not just to survive, but to rise. When the morning finally came, morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped slowly into the room, a pale light filtering through thin curtains, touching the edges of the walls, the blanket, the small crib beside the bed. For a long moment, Mia did not move. She lay on her side, eyes half open, listening. No shouting, no pounding on a door, no sharp voices cutting through the air. Only the soft hum of the building waking up and the faint rhythm of her own breathing. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, as if peace were something she was not allowed to trust. She waited for the fear to rush back into her chest the way it always did when she opened her eyes. But it didn't come the same way. It hovered at the edges, uncertain, weakened by the fact that for the first time in months, she had slept through the night. Ethan stirred in the crib, a small sound escaping his lips, not a cry, not yet, just a gentle reminder that he was there. Mia lifted herself carefully and leaned over him, her heart softening instantly. His eyes fluttered open, dark and curious, and when he saw her, his mouth parted into something that wasn't quite a smile but carried the beginning of one. The sight of it struck her so deeply she had to press her fingers to her lips. She hadn't seen that look in days. She lifted him into her arms, breathing in the warm, clean scent of his skin, whispering his name like a promise. For a moment, she simply held him and let herself feel what safety was supposed to feel like. There was a quiet knock at the door. Mia's body tensed automatically before her mind could catch up, but the voice that followed was gentle. "Good morning, Mia. It's Margaret." Mia stood, adjusted Ethan against her shoulder, and opened the door. Margaret stood there with a soft smile and 2 cups of something steaming in her hands. "I thought you might like some tea," she said, "and there's breakfast downstairs whenever you're ready." Mia hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Margaret set 1 cup on the small dresser, the other on the bedside table, and glanced at Ethan. "He looks peaceful," she said. "He slept," Mia replied quietly, almost in disbelief. "All night." Margaret's eyes softened. "That's what these walls are for." They sat for a few minutes while Mia drank the tea slowly, warmth spreading through her fingers, down her arms, into places that had felt hollow for too long. Margaret didn't rush her. She didn't ask questions that demanded answers. She simply told her where the bathroom was, where clean towels waited, where she could find clothes if she needed them. And before she left, she paused at the door. "Sandra and Keanu are already downstairs," she said. "They came early." Something in Mia's chest shifted at that. They hadn't said, "We'll check in." They had said, "We'll be here," and they were. Downstairs, the common room carried the smell of coffee, toast, and something sweet baking somewhere nearby. A few women sat at scattered tables, some alone, some with children, the atmosphere quiet but alive. It didn't feel like a shelter the way Mia had imagined shelters to feel. It felt like a place where people were being put back together carefully, piece by piece. She spotted Sandra first, standing near the counter, holding a cup of coffee with both hands, speaking softly to a woman with tired eyes and a toddler on her hip. Then she saw Keanu at a small table near the window, reading something on his phone, his posture relaxed, his attention focused. When he looked up and saw her, his face changed in that subtle way it had the night before, like relief easing into his features. They moved toward her, not rushing, not calling out, respecting the fragile quiet of the place. "Good morning," Sandra said softly. Mia nodded. "I didn't know mornings could feel like this," she admitted. Keanu smiled faintly. "Like what?" "Like you're not already behind before you even start." They sat together at a small table. Sandra signaled to someone behind the counter, and a plate of warm food was placed gently in front of Mia. Eggs, toast, a small bowl of fruit, simple things, but to Mia they felt almost ceremonial. She hesitated again, the old instinct to decline, to make herself smaller, rising in her throat. Sandra noticed and spoke before the reflex could win. "You don't need to ration kindness," she said quietly. "You can accept what's offered." Mia nodded and took a bite. The food tasted different when she wasn't swallowing fear with it. Ethan made small, impatient sounds, and Margaret appeared again, smiling, bringing a warm bottle. Mia fed him, watching as he drank, watching the tension ease from his tiny body. Something inside her loosened with it. After breakfast, Margaret joined them, carrying a thin folder. She sat and placed it gently on the table. "I won't overwhelm you," she said to Mia, "but I want you to know what's possible. We have connections to transitional housing, legal advisors who work with women dealing with harassment, eviction threats, and unsafe situations, employment programs, childcare assistance. You don't have to decide everything today, but you don't have to face any of it alone." The words felt heavy and light at the same time, heavy with possibility, light with relief. Mia stared at the folder, then at Margaret. "I don't have money," she said, the old defense rising. Margaret shook her head gently. "What you have is need, and courage. That's enough to start." Sandra leaned forward slightly. "I also want to make sure you're protected from that man," she said, her tone calm but firm. "We can connect you with a lawyer who specializes in situations like yours, someone who can help document what's happening, who can make it harder for him to threaten you." Mia's breath caught. The idea that someone could stand between her and the fear she'd been carrying felt almost unreal. "He said it wasn't over," she whispered. "People like him, they don't stop." Keanu met her eyes. "That's why you don't handle people like him alone," he said. "We take this seriously." Mia nodded slowly. She wanted to believe, she wanted to trust. But the past had trained her to brace for disappointment. Still, she felt something new stirring beneath the fear, not optimism, determination. As if summoned by that thought, one of the women from another table approached. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, her hair pulled back loosely, dark circles beneath her eyes. She carried a mug in both hands like she was warming more than her fingers. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, looking at Mia. "I just wanted to say I came here 6 months ago with my daughter. I thought my life was over. It was. It just hadn't started the way I needed yet." Mia looked up at her, startled. The woman offered a small, almost shy smile. "You don't have to believe it today," she added, "but you will." Then she walked back to her table, leaving behind a sentence that felt like a seed. After Margaret excused herself, Sandra and Keanu stayed with Mia, not crowding her with instructions, but helping her breathe through the reality of what came next. Sandra made a few quiet calls, her voice low, her words precise. Keanu stepped away briefly to speak with Margaret near the hallway, then returned. When he sat again, his expression was steady. "We've set up a meeting for tomorrow," he said, "with someone who can help you file a report and explore protection options. Today, you rest. You stay here, you don't go back to that apartment." Mia's instinct was to protest, to say she needed her things, her documents, the small pieces of a life she'd been clinging to. But the thought of stepping back into that hallway, into that building where fear lived in every corner, made her chest tighten. "What if he goes there looking for me?" she asked. Sandra nodded once. "That's part of what we're handling," she said. "You don't show up where he expects, you don't answer messages, we let the right people step in." Mia looked down at Ethan, who was now wide awake, gazing up at her as if the world were still new and safe. She brushed her thumb gently across his cheek. "I don't want him growing up thinking fear is normal," she said. Keanu's voice softened. "Then today is the first day you teach him something else." The morning moved slowly. Sandra left briefly to speak with someone in another room, then returned. Keanu walked with Mia through part of the building, showing her where the small play area was, where the laundry room waited, where a quiet garden space sat behind the building, hidden from the street. The garden was small, but green, rain-washed leaves shining in the light, a wooden bench beneath a tree. Mia stepped into it like she was stepping into another world. She sat and watched Ethan kick his tiny feet, his hands grasping at nothing and everything. For the first time, she let herself imagine him taking his first step somewhere that wasn't filled with panic. Sandra joined them there later, carrying 3 cups of coffee. She sat on the bench beside Mia, close enough to share warmth, far enough to leave space. "You're quiet," she said gently. Mia hesitated, then spoke. "I'm scared to believe this," she admitted. "I'm scared if I let myself hope it will hurt more when it's taken away." Sandra looked at the leaves overhead, then back at her. "Hope isn't a guarantee," she said. "It's a choice, and it always feels risky, but living without it costs more." Mia nodded slowly. She looked down at Ethan, then back at Sandra and Keanu. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "You walk past hundreds of people. Why did you stop for me?" Keanu answered quietly. "Because I saw a mother who wasn't asking for attention," he said. "She was asking the world to let her exist without crushing her, and I know what it feels like when no one answers that." Sandra added, "And because kindness only works if it's personal." The afternoon passed with small, grounding things. A nap, a fresh change of clothes someone offered without question, a long shower that washed the night from Mia's skin. She returned to the common room lighter, though the fear had not vanished. It simply no longer ruled the air. She found Keanu sitting with another child on the floor, helping him stack wooden blocks, the boy's laughter soft but sincere. The sight stopped her, not because he was famous, but because he was gentle. She watched him for a moment before he noticed her. When he did, he smiled in that small way that made it feel like nothing in the world needed to be proven. As evening approached, Margaret gathered everyone who wished into the common room for a simple meal. Not a ceremony, just food shared. Mia sat among women who spoke quietly about their days, their children, their worries, their small victories. No one asked her to explain herself. No one made her the center of a story she wasn't ready to tell. She was simply there. Later, as the sky outside darkened again, Sandra and Keanu stood near the door, preparing to leave for the night. Mia felt the old fear stir at the idea of being without them again. Sandra seemed to sense it. She stepped closer. "We'll be back tomorrow," she said. "And the day after that, this isn't a single visit." Keanu nodded. "Rest tonight," he added. "Tomorrow we take the next step." Mia looked at them both, the words heavy in her chest. "You changed something in me," she said quietly. "I don't know what yet, but something." Sandra smiled softly. "That's how beginnings feel." When they left, the door closing gently behind them, Mia didn't feel abandoned. She felt held by the building, by the people in it, by the quiet promise of morning. She returned to her room, placed Ethan in the crib, and sat on the bed beside him. She watched him sleep again the way she had the night before, but this time her thoughts moved differently. They did not circle only danger. They brushed against plans, against the possibility of work, of a place to live, of a life that was not shaped entirely by fear. She pressed her hand over her heart and let out a slow breath. Morning had come, and it had not destroyed her. And in that simple, almost unbelievable truth, Mia began to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Not rescue, not luck, but the first quiet stirring of strength. The day she chose to stand. The second morning at the shelter arrived differently than the first. It did not creep in cautiously like a stranger. It entered the room with quiet familiarity, a pale wash of light settling over the walls, the crib, the folded clothes on the chair. Mia woke before Ethan this time, her eyes opening slowly, her body bracing for the familiar surge of anxiety that usually greeted her at the edge of consciousness. But instead of panic, what she felt first was awareness, the soft hum of the building. The distant murmur of voices preparing breakfast, the steady, gentle breathing of her son. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and realized that something inside her had shifted. Fear was still present, but it was no longer the first thing to speak. It no longer owned the room. She turned her head and watched Ethan sleep, his small hand curled near his face, his mouth relaxed in a way she rarely saw when they were on the move. The sight of him like this, unguarded, peaceful, filled her chest with a strange mixture of relief and resolve. This was what she wanted, not perfection, not luxury, just the chance for him to rest without tension in his tiny body. She reached out and brushed her finger lightly along his knuckles, and as if sensing her, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw her, he made a small sound, something close to a laugh, and the sound broke through her like sunlight. She lifted him gently, holding him against her, and whispered, "We're still here," as if confirming it for both of them. After breakfast, Margaret invited Mia into a small office near the back of the building. The room was modest, lined with folders and community notices pinned neatly to the walls, a potted plant sitting near the window like a quiet promise that growth could happen even in limited space. Sandra was already there, seated at the small table, her posture calm but attentive. Keanu arrived a few minutes later, nodding to Mia with that same gentle steadiness she was beginning to recognize as safety. Margaret closed the door softly behind them, not to isolate, but to protect the conversation that needed to happen. "We won't rush you," Margaret began, her voice even and warm. "But there are a few things we should talk about today, so you know your options." Mia adjusted Ethan on her lap, her shoulders tightening slightly. Options had always felt like a word other people used, people with margins, people with cushions. But she nodded, because she had learned that this place did not use words lightly. Margaret slid a thin stack of papers across the table. "First," she said, "your immediate safety. We can help you document what's been happening with your landlord and anyone else who's been threatening you. That includes harassment, intimidation, and unsafe living conditions. We work with a legal advocate who can meet with you today, not to pressure you, but to inform you." Mia swallowed. The word legal carried weight. It carried the memory of offices that made her feel small, of forms that asked questions she didn't know how to answer, of systems that moved too slowly for people who were already drowning. "I don't want to make things worse," she said quietly. Sandra leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on the table, her voice calm but clear. "Standing up for yourself doesn't make things worse," she said. "It makes them visible, and visibility is often what protects you." Mia looked at her, then at Keanu. "What if he gets angry?" she asked. "What if they come after me harder?" Keanu didn't soften the truth, but he shaped it carefully. "People who rely on fear often react when they feel it slipping," he said. "That's why you don't face that reaction alone. You build a wall around yourself with people, with documentation, with places they can't reach you." The words settled slowly. Wall, people, documentation, places they can't reach you. They didn't sound like fantasy. They sounded like structure. Margaret continued, "Second, longer-term housing. We have a partner program that offers transitional apartments for mothers with infants. They're small but private, safe. You could apply today. There's a process, but we can start it." Mia's breath caught, a private space, a door that locked, a place where she could put Ethan down and know he would still be there when she turned around. "I don't have good credit," she said automatically. "I don't have savings." Margaret smiled gently. "You have a child and a need," she replied. "That's what these programs are built for." The meeting went on, covering childcare assistance, job counseling, food programs. The words stacked one on top of another like the beginnings of a bridge. Mia listened, nodding, occasionally asking small, careful questions, but beneath her listening, something else was happening. She was realizing that help was not a single moment. It was a process. It was paperwork and patience and uncomfortable conversations and learning to accept guidance without feeling erased. And for the first time, she felt something close to readiness. After Margaret stepped out to arrange the legal advocate, the room grew quieter. Mia shifted Ethan and finally spoke the thought that had been building. "I don't want to just be hidden," she said. "I don't want to just run from him. I want him to stop." Sandra studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's not revenge," she said. "That's protection." Keanu met Mia's eyes. "It's also a choice," he added. "And it has weight, but it's your choice." Mia looked down at Ethan, then back up. "I'm tired of living like my life can be threatened at any moment," she said. "I'm tired of teaching him to flinch." The legal advocate arrived shortly after, a woman named Renee with a calm voice and a presence that didn't rush or intimidate. She explained things simply. What counted as harassment, how to record messages, how to request a protective order, how shelters and community organizations coordinated with local authorities when someone's safety was at risk. Mia listened, her hands tight around the edge of her chair at first, then gradually loosening as the words formed a shape she could understand. Renee didn't promise miracles, she offered steps, and steps felt like something Mia could take. By early afternoon, Mia had signed her name more times than she could count. Each signature felt strange, like she was writing herself back into a system she had long believed had no place for her. When it was done, she sat back, exhausted, her head light, her chest heavy. Sandra handed her a bottle of water. Keanu pulled out a chair and sat beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough to be solid. "You did something hard today," he said. Mia let out a breath that trembled. "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "I feel like I'm about to fall over." Keanu's voice was quiet. "That's often what brave feels like." Later, while Ethan napped, Mia walked alone into the small garden behind the building. The leaves were still damp from earlier rain, tiny droplets clinging to their edges. She sat on the wooden bench and closed her eyes, letting the cool air touch her face. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't scanning for exits. She wasn't calculating where to go next. She was simply sitting, and in that stillness, memories rose. The first time she'd held Ethan. The night she realized she couldn't pay rent. The moment she decided to leave her sister's place. The way she'd walked the streets some nights just to avoid being in one place too long. The weight of it all pressed against her chest, but instead of crushing her, it steadied her. She thought of the woman who had approached her in the common room the day before and said, "I thought my life was over. It was." The sentence repeated itself inside Mia like a quiet drumbeat. Not a guarantee, a possibility. Sandra found her there a little while later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Mia and sat beside her. They didn't speak right away. The silence between them felt easy, like it didn't need to be filled to prove anything. Finally, Mia said, "I keep thinking about last night, about if Keanu hadn't looked out that window, if you hadn't walked into that café, I would have gone back out there, and everything would have kept going the same." Sandra took a slow sip of her coffee. "Maybe," she said, "but you still would have been someone capable of change. We didn't give you that, you had it." Mia shook her head slightly. "I didn't feel like I did." Sandra turned to her gaze steady. "Most people don't," she said, "not until someone reflects it back to them." Mia watched a small bird hop along the edge of the garden. "What happens," she asked quietly, "when you help someone and they fail again, when they fall back into the same mess?" Sandra considered the question. "Then you help them stand again," she said, "and you let them decide whether to keep walking. Kindness doesn't control outcomes, it supports effort." The words settled deeply. Mia wrapped her hands around the warm cup, absorbing it. "I want to work," she said suddenly. "I want to do something that feels like mine again, something I'm good at." Sandra's expression softened. "Margaret mentioned you worked at a daycare." Mia nodded. "Before everything, I loved it. I loved watching them learn. I loved knowing I was part of something good." Sandra smiled. "There's a childcare center 2 blocks from one of the transitional apartments. They partner with this place. They're often looking for assistance. We can talk to them." The possibility struck Mia like a quiet bell. Work that made sense. Work that aligned with who she was before survival narrowed her world. "I don't even know if they'd look at me," she said. Sandra's voice was gentle but certain. "You don't decide that for them. You show up. That's the rest." That evening, when Keanu returned from a short meeting with Margaret, he found Mia back in her room, sitting on the bed while Ethan lay beside her, gurgling softly at a hanging toy someone had brought in. She looked up when he entered, and something in her face had changed. Not happiness, Not relief, something quieter, something rooted. "I talked to Sandra," she said, "about work." Keanu nodded, waiting. "I think I want to try," she continued. "Not tomorrow, not all at once, but I want to start building something again." Keanu felt something warm settle in his chest. "That's not small," he said. "That's how lives change." Mia looked down at her son, then back up. "I'm scared," she said, "but I don't want to let fear choose for me anymore." Keanu held her gaze. Then today mattered. As night came again, Mia lay in bed with Ethan sleeping close, listening to the distant sounds of the building settling. She was still in the same city, still without a permanent home, still with uncertainty ahead. But she was not where she had been. She had spoken her truth. She had signed her name to her own protection. She had imagined a future that did not revolve around escape. And somewhere in that long, quiet day, without ceremony, without applause, Mia had done something she had not done in a very long time. She had chosen to stand. The future she built with her own hands. The morning that followed did not feel like a rescue scene. It did not arrive with dramatic music or sudden certainty. It came the way real mornings do, with soft light and ordinary sounds and the quiet weight of choice. Mia woke before her alarm, not because fear had shaken her out of sleep, but because Ethan had shifted beside her, his small body stretching, his breath warm against her arm. For a moment she lay still, letting herself notice the room, the clean lines of the walls, the faint hum of the building, the muted voices somewhere down the hall. It was not luxury, it was not permanence, but it was stability. And stability, she was beginning to understand, was not something you waited for, it was something you practiced. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Ethan too abruptly, and let her feet touch the floor. The simple act felt different now. She was not bracing for the next blow. She was preparing for the next step. She lifted her son, held him close, and whispered his name the way she had been doing since the night in the café, not as a plea, but as a promise. "We're still here." Downstairs, the common room was already awake. Margaret was speaking quietly with one of the staff members near the counter. A woman with a toddler was helping her child stack plastic cups on a low table. The air carried the familiar smells of toast and coffee. Mia took it in as she walked, not rushing, not shrinking. She had slept again, and something about that fact alone felt like proof that change was not imaginary. Sandra arrived just after breakfast, her presence calm and focused, her movements purposeful without being hurried. She greeted Margaret, exchanged a few quiet words, and then found Mia near the window where she sat feeding Ethan. "Ready?" Sandra asked gently. Mia hesitated for only a breath. "I think so." The childcare center was only a few blocks away, tucked between a small pharmacy and a laundromat, its front windows painted with bright shapes and handprints. Mia had walked past places like this before, always with the ache of memory, always with the thought that she used to belong somewhere like that. As they stood on the sidewalk in front of it now, her chest tightened with something between fear and longing. She adjusted Ethan against her shoulder, feeling the familiar tremor in her hands. Sandra noticed but did not comment. She simply stood beside her, not as a shield but as presence. Inside, the air was warm and carried the sound of children laughing somewhere down a hall. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. Sandra spoke quietly to her, explaining that Mia had experienced that she was looking to return to work when she was able. The woman's expression softened, and she motioned them into a small office. They talked, not about perfection, about reality, about schedules, about needs, about what it meant to work while raising a child with limited resources. Mia answered honestly. She didn't polish her story. She didn't hide the fact that she was staying at a shelter. She spoke about what she loved about working with children, about the patience she had learned, about the way she understood exhaustion because she lived inside it. When it was over, the woman nodded slowly. "We can start with a few hours a week," she said. "We'll see how it goes." Mia didn't cry in that office. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded back, her throat tight, her mind strangely quiet. Because for the first time in a long time, something had opened that did not feel temporary. By the time they walked back toward the shelter, the sky had brightened fully. Sandra glanced at her. "You did that," she said. Mia let out a breath. "I almost didn't go inside." Sandra smiled softly. "And yet you did." That afternoon, Renee called with an update. The documentation had been filed. A protective order process had been initiated. The landlord had been contacted formally. It did not mean danger vanished. It meant it had been named. And naming it, Mia was learning, was a kind of power. When Margaret relayed the details, Mia listened, her hand resting on Ethan's back, her body still but her mind alert. She was no longer just enduring, she was participating. Keanu arrived later that day, quieter than usual, his expression thoughtful. He didn't come with speeches. He came with the same steadiness he had offered from the beginning. They sat together in the small garden behind the building, where the leaves still shimmered faintly from earlier rain. Ethan lay between them on a blanket, fascinated by the light moving through branches. "I start a few hours a week," Mia said, the words still strange on her tongue. Keanu looked at her, something like pride softening his eyes. "How does that feel?" "Scary," she admitted, "and right." He nodded once. Those two often walked together. Mia watched her son's tiny fingers open and close. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said, "but I know what I don't want it to be anymore." Keanu's voice was low. "That's enough to begin." She hesitated, then asked the question that had lived in her since the café. "Why did you really stop that night?" she said. Not the kind answer, the true one. Keanu was quiet for a long moment. The city's distant noise brushed against the garden walls. Finally, he spoke. "Because I've sat on benches when I didn't want to exist," he said. "Because I've walked through days where I felt invisible, and because I know how much damage silence can do when it meets pain, I couldn't be silent." Mia absorbed the words slowly. "Then you didn't just help me," she said. "You honored something in yourself." He met her gaze. Maybe. They sat without speaking after that, the kind of silence that didn't need explanation. Over the next weeks, change arrived in pieces: paperwork, appointments, interviews, exhaustion that came from effort instead of fear. Mia moved into a small transitional apartment provided through the shelter's partner program. It was not large, it did not impress, but it was hers. The first night there, she stood in the doorway for a long time, holding Ethan, staring at the walls as if they might disappear. Then she stepped inside and closed the door. The sound of the lock turning was small. The effect was not. She started her hours at the childcare center. At first, her hands shook when she signed in. Then they steadied. Children had a way of anchoring her, their questions, their laughter, their unfiltered emotions. She found herself remembering parts of herself that had gone quiet: patience, creativity, the strange joy of watching someone learn something small and new. She came home tired, but it was a tiredness that did not hollow her out. Sandra checked in often, sometimes by phone, sometimes in person, never as a supervisor, always as someone who cared whether Mia was sleeping, whether she was eating, whether she was allowing herself to be human. Keanu visited too, less frequently, but with the same presence. He did not hover. He did not disappear. He showed up the way people do when they understand that support is not an event. It is a rhythm. The legal process moved forward. The landlord's threats stopped. The messages ceased. The fear did not vanish overnight, but it lost its sharpest edges. Mia began to walk her neighborhood without constantly looking over her shoulder. She began to take Ethan to a small park nearby. She began to talk to other mothers. She began to imagine things like birthday parties and school backpacks and mornings that did not start with crisis. One evening, months after the night in the cafe, Mia invited Sandra and Keanu to her apartment. It was small. The couch had come from a donation room. The walls were still mostly bare. But on the refrigerator hung a drawing from one of the children at the center. And in the corner sat a small plant she had bought with her own money because she wanted to see something grow. Ethan crawled across the floor, determined and loud, his laughter filling the space like proof. They sat around her small table drinking tea. No speeches, no ceremonies, just presence. At one point, Ethan crawled toward Keanu, pulled himself unsteadily to his feet using Keanu's leg, and then plopped down again, laughing at himself. Keanu laughed softly too, a sound that felt like something rare and genuine. Mia watched them, her chest tightening with emotion she didn't fully have language for. "I used to think kindness was a moment," she said quietly. "Something that happened and then disappeared. Now I think it's a practice." Sandra smiled. "So is strength." Mia looked down at her son. "I'm not afraid of being tired anymore," she said. "I'm afraid of forgetting how far we've come." Keanu met her eyes. "You won't," he said. "Not if you tell this story someday." She nodded slowly. "I will, when someone else is standing where I stood." Later, after they left, after the dishes were washed and Ethan was asleep in his small bed, Mia stood alone in her living room. The city lights glowed through the window, no longer threatening, just present. She thought about the woman she had been that night outside the cafe, rocking her child in the cold, believing she was invisible. She thought about how close she had been to disappearing inside her fear. And she thought about the chain of small choices that had brought her here: accepting a cup of soup, sitting down, speaking the truth, signing her name, walking into a building, walking into an office, showing up again, and again, and again. Her life was not perfect, but it was hers. She walked into Ethan's room and stood watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling, his face relaxed in a way that once felt impossible. She placed a hand over her heart and let herself feel the full weight of it, not just what had been given to her, what she had built. Because in the end, the night Keanu Reeves noticed a struggling mother, and her baby did not change Mia's life because he was famous. It changed her life because he chose to see her, and Sandra chose to stand with her. And she chose, finally, to believe that being seen was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. And as the city moved quietly beyond her window, Mia whispered the words that had once felt too fragile to hold. "We're going to be okay." This time she did not say it as hope. She said it as truth.